everyone, and welcome to Streaming Science. I'm Cassandra Huck, and I'll be your host today. I'm also joined by Dr. Jamie Lewitzo, who is our director. Then we have Victoria Talcott, Matthew Morton, Abby Steffen, who are helping with questions and additional iPads, Jenny Gravely behind the iPad on right now, Deb Weitzenkamp from Nebraska Extension, and I'm also joined by John Hay, who's going to be our content specialist today. John, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Hello, I'm really excited to be here. My name is John Hay, and I'm an extension educator here with the University of Nebraska-Lincoln. I'm in the Biological Systems Engineering Department, and I focus on renewable energy and biofuels, and I teach economics about those systems and how they work to lots of adults and youth across the state, and I'm really excited to be here.
Awesome. We're glad you're here today, too. So today, we're joining you live from the University of Nebraska-Lincoln. This is the second live electronic field trip that Streaming Science has produced. Streaming Science brings science directly to you and your class through an interactive web broadcast. Today, our program, Sun Rays and Windy Days, is going to be all about alternative energy. Alternative energy is energy generated in ways that does not deplete natural resources or harm the environment. So first off, we're going to learn about how solar energy works, and then we're going to learn about wind energy. Today, the schools we have joining us are Lincoln Elementary, Newell Elementary, Zwiernik Homeschool, Heartland Elementary, and South Platte Elementary. If your school wasn't named, leave us a comment so you know that you're watching with us. So before we talk about alternative energy, John, can you first tell us what energy is in the first place and how it works? How are homes heated and cooled, and why is it important? Why is alternative energy becoming so important?
Well, I think renewable energy is really exciting, and it's going to be growing in your lifetimes and our lifetimes, and so it's really a kind of a fun topic to talk about. Let's think about energy just for a second. I'm going to give you some terms that we're going to talk about throughout the whole day today, and that when I think energy is all around us, and we experience it in lots of different ways. We can think about the movement of an object, like a ball. If I throw it in the air, it has kinetic energy or energy of movement. We could think about energy as temperature, as heat. I can feel heat or cold. That would be thermal energy. I can also think about electromagnetic energy, which I might think about electricity or the moving of electrons. And I can also think about chemical energy. So if I'm eating your lunch today, if you're eating your lunch today, you are putting chemical energy into your body, and your body is using that energy to live and move around. And so the way we use energy is to take one of those forms and turn it into another form so that it's useful to us. So if you think about our homes, let's think about how our home has a heating system that heats our home with either electricity or natural gas. We also have the lights in our houses. So another way to think about energy is light. So the electrical energy gets turned into light energy that we see in our TV or maybe our cell phone. We also have the electricity turning into movement, maybe a fan that's moving, maybe the generator, the compressor that's running our refrigerator. And so then the compressor runs, it turns that back into thermal energy or movement of thermal energy. So energy is all around us, and it's really important that we try to get that energy from as clean of sources as we can and as low a cost as we can. And so that's where that balance is that we're trying to make. Across the United States, where we get our energy from an electrical standpoint, is coal is number one, natural gas is number two, nuclear is number three, hydroelectric, wind, and solar make up that mix. And so we're really excited about those renewables, but they are small but growing. And so that's kind of why we're excited about this topic.
Great. So can you tell us a little bit about where we are today? We're in the Animal Science building here at UNL. We have solar panels up top. Can you tell us about what they provide electricity for and how much electricity they generate?
Yeah, we're standing in a utility room here at the University of Nebraska in the Animal Science building, and you can see around us that there's all these pipes and cables and wires and hoses and things, and this room is helping heat, cool, and provide the electricity for this building. It just so happens that above us there is a bunch of solar panels. There's actually 162 solar panels up above us in a large array, and that provides electricity partially for this building. That solar panel, or all those solar panels, are big enough to run as many as maybe 8 to 10 homes of your homes, but this building is so big, basically the building uses all of the electricity. We're standing in this utility room partially because part of the solar system that we're standing next to are these inverters. And these inverters are an integral part of how the solar panels work, because solar panels create a type of electricity that we don't use. They create DC, or direct current electricity, and so then we've got to take these inverters and turn that in. So let's look at one of these inverters and see how we're doing. We're going to turn the light on, and we can see that this says 206 volts. That's the alternating current, or the wavy current is part of the electric grid. The DC, the 328, is what the solar panels are generating right now. 328 volts DC is enough to kill us. So it's good that this is all encapsulated inside a safe box, because there's a lot of electricity in there. And then the 531 watts, that's how much those 18 solar panels are generating right now. This one inverter has 18 solar panels attached to it.
Great, thanks, John. So can you tell us a little bit more about your definition of solar energy, and how does solar energy work?
Yeah, let's. I brought a prop here, and when we think about solar energy and the sun, we need to think about that the sunlight as energy. The sunlight comes down. If we were standing in the sun and we held our arm out, we would feel warm. And that warmth is all that sunlight, all those little packets of energy that are sunlight hitting our skin, and our skin absorbing it and then heating up. So we know that sunlight has energy, but a solar panel has a special crystal inside it that can use that little packet of energy called a photon and turn it directly into electricity. And so let's look at some of those. I brought a solar panel with me. And so what we did is we grew a silicon crystal, and that silicon crystal has electrons inside it that get excited by the sun. And then once those electrons are excited, then we capture them with those little wires. Can you see all those little wires in there? The sun captures, or the sunlight excites the electrons hit the little wires, they flow down, creating electric current. We capture that electric current and use it for whatever we want to use it for. For charging a battery, for running a refrigerator, for running our television set. All the things that we use electricity for in our homes and buildings.
Awesome. So now we know what a solar panel is. We know what it does. What's the importance of them, and how much solar energy do we use here in Nebraska and in the United States?
The exciting thing about solar, to me, is that we're taking something that's free, the sun, and we're turning it into something that has value, electricity, and we're doing that in a way that doesn't burn natural resources. It doesn't burn coal. It doesn't burn natural gas. It doesn't, and so because of that, that's kind of exciting. We think about that sunlight. On the roof here of the Animal Science Building above us, the sun is beating down on that roof and making the roof hot. So now it's beating down on the solar panels, and the solar panels are turning that sunlight into electricity. So it's not that we're using something that we just weren't using before. So that's really exciting. If we were to place a solar panel in the United States of America and look at the best place to put it, we would think about the southwest part of the United States, where there's a lot of sunlight, also not a lot of rain, not a lot of clouds to block the sun. And so that would be the best place for a solar farm. Yet the best place to actually put a solar panel is probably the place with the highest cost electricity. And so places like California, the East Coast of the United States, Hawaii really are the best places to put solar panels today, because we're generating something that has the highest value, thus it's the most cost effective.
Awesome, thank you. So now that we've learned about solar panels and solar energy, we're going to have Victoria come over and take your questions real quick.
So, John, so far we've had 4 questions come in, and the first one that pops up is, can solar panels still convert energy on a really cloudy day?
That's an excellent question, and the answer is yes, but to a much smaller amount. So the solar array behind us is 44 kilowatts in size. And so if we were to think about, I'm going to grab, and we're going to look at the real data here, and we're going to answer that question just perfectly. We're going to see what it can generate. And right now, it's a cloudy day right now, and we're generating 5.39 kW. Do you see the 5.39 there? That is what it's generating. It could generate 44 if it were sunny. So it does generate when it's cloudy, but much less. And we can think about those photons are not getting there. They're getting hit by the or they're hitting the clouds, and they're probably bouncing back up towards space or something like that, or they're being absorbed by the clouds.
Okay, great. And the next question is, does snow or rain affect the solar panels?
That is an excellent question. And absolutely, for the same reason, whenever we're blocking the sunlight, we're going to reduce the amount of electricity generated by the solar panels. And so rain, though, does have an added benefit, and that when it's kind of dusty like it is right now with all the harvest going on and everything, the panels get kind of dirty, and that blocks sunlight itself. So the rain washes off the dust, and so the next day they typically do better. The snow, though, blocks it until the snow melts. Now, solar panels are dark colored typically. They're blue or black, and so the snow typically melts off within about a half a day, unless it's a really cold day or unless it's really deep snow.
Okay, that's really interesting about the rain. And the next question is, do you have solar panels at your own house?
I did. I installed a solar array this past February. And we're showing you a picture of it there, and you can see there that's my garage, and that there's 14 solar panels, and so mine generate 4.4 kilowatts of power, and this one above us is 44 kilowatts, so it's 10 times larger. But mine runs about half of my house on an annual basis, and I installed that this past year, and they're running and generating right now, but not near as much as the one that's at the building we're at, because it's not near as big. Remember, there's 14 solar panels at my house, and there's 162 here.
Okay, and we're getting a bunch of questions as I'm standing up here, but one was, what are kilowatts?
That's an excellent question. When we think about that, we use the term energy, right? And we think of energy as heat, but when we think of power, we think of how fast the energy is being produced. And so a good analogy would be speed in a car. So the energy is how far I went, 100 miles, but the power would be how fast I drove to get there. I could drive 25 miles an hour, and it would take me 4 hours to get to that 100 miles. The energy is the same, but the power is only 25, versus I could drive 100 miles an hour and get there in 1 hour. So the power is much higher when I go faster, but the energy in the end is the same. So when I say kilowatts, that's the power or how fast the system generates electricity. And then as that generates electricity at that speed, the longer it goes, the more I generate. So then I add up kilowatt hours, right? It's kilowatts times hours. So kilowatts is power, kilowatt hours is energy, and that's what I pay for in my electric bill, is kilowatt hours.
Okay, and the last question of this section is, how are solar panels made?
That is an excellent question, and it's fairly complex, but what we need to do is to grow a silicon crystal. And we grow silicon crystals in different ways. And so really, though, it's interesting is that we make silicon solar panels out of sand, because sand is made of silicon. And that silicon then is ground up really fine, heated till it's super hot. The impurities are taken out of it. And once we have almost pure silicon, then we begin to grow the crystal. We have this molten, hot, almost like a hot rock, and then we start to grow the crystal. And if we grow a great big crystal, we call it monocrystalline. And if we grow lots of little crystals and smash them together, we call it polycrystalline. And I'm going to show you a picture. I think I have a good picture or a good example here. I wonder if you can see this here. Can you see the light refract off of that solar panel? And there's all those little crystals inside. That is an example of polycrystalline. Remember where we grow small crystals and then we smash them together. Once those crystals are grown and smashed together, we slice them into really fine sheets. We put impurities in to create an electric field, and then we put those little electric wires on the surface, and then we cover it in glass, and then we have a silicon solar cell. We attach the cells together to make a solar panel, and then the panels go together to make the whole array.
Great. Thank you for answering all those questions.
Thank you, Victoria. All right, so now that we're done with solar power panels, we're going to get into wind turbines. So, John, what is wind? What's your definition of wind energy, and how is wind utilized for human benefit?
Okay, now we're talking about wind power, and wind power is we're going to use some of the same terms, but it's a little bit different because instead of using sunlight or the little photons, we're going to think about what is wind and how does it have energy. Remember I said that there's a type of energy called kinetic energy, which is an energy of motion. Well, those little wind air molecules have motion, and so I'm going to use a couple of props here, and I'm going to show you a little something. If this is my air molecule, and we can think about this as a little air molecule, and it blows in the wind, and it's flying with kinetic energy, and then it hits the wind turbine, and then behind it is going slower. It gave up some of its energy to the wind turbine and converted that into rotational energy. And so the wind is kinetic energy, and by taking some of that and turning it into rotational energy, then we can use that rotational energy in our wind turbine to generate electricity.
Awesome. Great demonstration. So wind turbines are really cool. How do they work? And then I also remember you talked earlier about 3 different kinds of turbines. Can you tell us a little bit about those?
Well, let's first get a little of the definition of those 3 different kinds of turbines. The 3 different kinds of turbines, one of the ways that we talk about them is we call it the axis or the shaft of the turbine. This one has a horizontal shaft because it's flat like this, and this would be called a horizontal axis turbine. If the turbine was vertical in orientation, we'd call it a vertical axis turbine. They typically have different types of blades. Either think about like cutting a barrel in half, that would be called a Savonius turbine, or if we were to use them, it looks more like an egg beater, that might be called a Darius turbine. They have different efficiencies, and they have different positive and negative attributes, but the horizontal axis tends to be the one with the greatest efficiency, thus it's the one that we use the most.
Awesome, thank you. So how much electricity do wind turbines provide, and how do they generate it?
Well, let's talk about how this turbine works and get some of this terminology quick. As we look at this wind turbine, we talked about that air molecule passing or hitting that blade and spinning it. And so then let's talk about the different parts of this particular turbine. Here we've got the tower, and this tower is a wood stick, but this is for my small one. In a big turbine, that would be a hollow metal tube. We call that the tower. This part up here, this entire part that holds the generator and everything else, is called the nacelle. And so this whole area up here is called the nacelle. This black piece that I have here we're going to call the hub. It holds the blades in place, and so there's the hub, and of course we have the blades. The hub and the blades spin, turning the gears in the gearbox. So when this spins one time around, this actual generator down here that's attached to this bottom gear spins 8 times around. So this is an 8-to-1 gear ratio. In a big turbine, that gear ratio might be 1 to 60 or as high as 1 to 220. So every time it goes around once, the generator spins 220 times around. So that's the gearbox that then turns it. So those are some of the parts that we're going to see in a real wind turbine. The last thing I want to get for terminology, and I want to cover this before we look at the video, is that the turbine can move to react to the wind. The wind is always in different directions. It's different wind speeds, as well as it comes from the north and then it comes from the south. And so to react to that wind, it does a couple things. One thing it can do is to turn its blades like this. And when it turns its blades like this, we call that the pitch, the blade pitch. And so what it might happen is that when the wind is slow, it may have a blade pitch like this. like this, and then when the wind is fast, it goes like this, and then when the wind gets too fast, it comes back and comes back down. And so it's constantly changing its blade pitch, reacting to the wind. The other thing it can do is change its direction. So if the wind is coming in this direction, and then the wind changes and comes from where you're at, it turns itself to face the wind, and we call that yaw. And so we can pitch with our blades, or we can yaw. And so in that turbine, it pitches and yaws to react to the wind. Now let's look at the video. Just recently, I had the opportunity, actually let's go to the safety part first. I just recently had the opportunity to climb up a wind turbine, and I climbed up the wind turbine that's here in Lincoln, that is owned by Lincoln Electric Systems. And before I climbed up, I needed to go through a safety training from Lincoln Electric Systems. And I want to talk about that real quick because it's kind of fun and it's kind of important. First of all, you can see I'm wearing a harness, I'm wearing a hard hat, I'm wearing safety glasses, I'm wearing gloves, and I'm getting all ready to climb. And so that's really important to be wearing all that safety equipment so that if I fall, it can catch me in that harness. The next thing, I went through a training, and one thing that's really important, and you can practice this at home, is that when you climb a ladder, they told me I have to always have 3 points of contact. That means 2 hands and a foot, or 2 feet and a hand. And so if you imagine, I move my one hand up while my other hand is still on the rung and my 2 feet are on the rung, then I might move a foot, then I might move my other hand. I've always got 3 points of contact on that as I climb up that ladder. You can see how tall that ladder goes. Now let's go to the video of me climbing it. You can see in the ladder a couple things. It was really a little bit scary to start climbing because you realize how tall it is and how far you have to go. But I also remembered that I'm attached to that so tall, I might get tired. So there's actually a cable that's right in front of my face that is actually pulling on me, pulling up so that I don't get as tired. The last thing I want you to see is that those black wires behind the ladder, that's the actual wires that the electricity goes down into the bottom of the turbine, underground, and out to the electric grid where everybody gets to use it. I'm getting up to a platform here, and there's multiple platforms in the tower. And as you get to the platform, I shut a gate or a hatch, and when I shut that hatch, I'm able to then unclip from the safety cable. And so here I go. I'm going to shut that hatch. Now I can stand there unhatched and be safe. The last section of the tower, remember that top of that tower was called the nacelle? I'm just about to climb up into the nacelle. And that big blue thing that you see right there in the center of the screen, that's actually the gearbox. So the gears are inside that blue box. And so that gearbox is the thing that, remember, turns the speed of the rotor up from 24 revolutions a minute to 1800 revolutions a minute. There's a short ladder to finish the climb, and this is one of the things that startled me the most when I was climbing this, is that I climb up into the nacelle and the door is wide open. And you have to remember, the door is wide open, but it's not like we're just walking outside. The door is wide open and we're 200 feet in the air. And so it was really a little bit scary for a moment when I said, oh, the door is open. There's a technician that went with me, and he helped me to be safe, and I clipped in back by that door and was able to look out the door. I also climbed up on top of the wind turbine, which was so cool. One of the things you see in the background of that picture was the state capitol building, if you saw it. I'm kind of turning around, looking at the hub, looking down across at the blades. And when you were look at how long that blade is. Those blades are 100 feet long, and just amazing. There's another turbine just off in the distance over there. There's 2 turbines there north of Lincoln. So it was one of the most exciting experiences ever. There's a picture, a selfie I took. I got to take a selfie while I'm up there, and I took a selfie of myself on the top of the wind turbine. It was really, really cool. The turbine swayed a little bit in the wind, and so you're up there and you think everything's stable, but you're just moving just a little bit. It was really fun.
That seems like a really cool experience, and we're glad that we got some footage of you going up there. So can you tell us a little bit why wind turbines are placed in specific locations, and how many do we have here in Nebraska?
That's an excellent question. I actually looked up that number this morning, and that there's just over 750 wind turbines in the state of Nebraska. So that's a lot, especially when you think about that they're worth about $6 million a piece. That's a lot of dollars in wind turbines. And so there's about 600. They generate about 12% of the electricity on an annual basis in Nebraska, which is pretty significant. But we still get a lot from coal and natural gas, but the wind turbines providing as much as 12%. You said where are good places for wind in the United States and Nebraska? In the United States, we would think about areas that have not a lot of trees and not a lot of hills and mountains. Well, Nebraska is that. Nebraska and all through the Great Plains, from Texas all the way up to North Dakota, are probably the best places in the nation for wind power. And if we were to think about Nebraska, we can really, most places in the state of Nebraska are good for wind, but some of the best would be around kind of the Albion, Petersburg area, a few places in northeast Nebraska, north and west of Norfolk. Also, there's some places in the southeast and south central part of the state, and then a lot of the sandhills in western Nebraska are excellent places for wind. But we got to balance where we put a wind turbine with. We need to put a wind turbine where there's not a lot of people, because they have to be away from population so that people can be safe in case something goes wrong. We also have to think about putting them close enough to where the people are, because people need to use that electricity. So that's balancing. We got to put them in the rural area, but close enough to an urban area. And then lastly, we got to think about the wildlife. We got to think about where do the birds fly, where are we going to cause the least harm. And so there's a lot of science to figuring out where do those birds fly, where do they hang out, how high do they fly, and what risk do we have of hurting them.
It's cool to know that we have so many wind turbines and use so much wind energy here in Nebraska. So we learned a lot about wind turbines, and we know a lot about wind energy now, so we're going to bring Victoria back on for some more questions.
Thank you. All right, so we've had some more questions come in, and the first one is, how tall are wind turbines?
That is an excellent question, and wind turbines are all very tall, and part of that is that wind power, it's the higher we go, the more wind there is. And so we got to get those up high. Also, the bigger the wind turbine, the more power it generates. So we want wind turbines to be tall, and we want them to be big. The wind turbine that I climbed is about 200 feet, and then that blade is another 100 feet. So it might be a total of 300 feet at the top. Some of the bigger wind turbines, there's some that are a little bigger, that hub height, which is, remember that where the blades are attached, that's the hub. The hub height might be close to 300 feet, and then have a 100 to 150 foot blade, and that blade then reaches 400 to 450 feet. So the question that I would ask all you students is, how tall is our Nebraska State Capitol building? What do you think? Does anybody know? Now, this is something you need to learn, and especially as fourth graders when you're studying Nebraska history and the Nebraska State Capitol, you might learn, and if you're not, I'm going to tell you now, that this Nebraska State Capitol building is 400 feet tall. And then there's a statue on top. That statue is called the Sower. The Sower is 19 feet tall. So the whole thing is 419 feet tall. So we think about a wind turbine. A wind turbine is typically about the height of this Nebraska State Capitol, maybe as high as 50 feet taller than the Nebraska State Capitol. So they're very, very big.
And a great question that just came in is, how long have wind turbines been in Nebraska?
the first wind turbines put in Nebraska were put in Nebraska in the mid-1990s. The Ainsworth wind farm, well, we could change that question. Small wind turbines at farms were very, very popular in Nebraska in the 1920s, 30s, and 40s. And then Rural Electric came in and gave grid electricity to most of the whole state, and we took a lot of those small wind turbines down. And then the modern wind turbines, the big white ones we see, the mid-1990s, the first wind farm was put in around Ainsworth, and then it was a slow progression from there. We got a couple of wind farms, but since about 2009, when we started changing laws to try to encourage wind development in the state, the numbers have spiked and went from maybe 30 turbines in 2000 to 750 today.
Okay, thank you. And another question that has come in from the students is, how do you get the blade on? So how is it all put together?
That's a cool question. The answer is a really, really, really big crane. And so if we see, let's go to a picture of one of those big wind turbines. And when we see that wind turbine, we park one big crane beside the tower and a second big crane to help balance the blades, and then the two of them pick that blade, the whole blade assembly together, the hub and all three blades. They pick those all up together, they lift them up all the way to the top, and they attach them on. And it all happens in just a few hours.
Okay. And which do you feel is a better source of energy, solar panels or wind turbines?
That depends on what we're using the energy for, right? And for grid power, wind turbines are far more economical, and economics is a really critical piece. And so they're more cost effective. They produce a lot of electricity at a very low cost. And so on a large scale, I prefer wind power a lot. On a small scale, if we're thinking about a home or a small business, solar panel is by far the best. And that is because it's simpler, has less moving parts, and the cost per unit electricity is lower on small systems. So the answer is both. I like solar for small systems. I like wind for very big systems, and that's just really based on both economics and kind of the robustness of the technology. When it comes to small wind turbines, have a few issues with breaking down, and it's hard to fix them. While that big wind turbine produces so much electricity, it's worth the extra hassle.
Okay, and what happens to the wind turbine if there is no wind that day?
That's a good question. Wind turbines only spin, if we were to think about it on a annual basis, they really only spin about 40 to 55% of the time. And so the rest of that time, they're off. And so I want to tell you something that'll help you determine if a wind turbine is off, based on the wind or based on whether it's being broke down or something. One of the things is if it's a windy day, they should be turning. But the wind isn't the same everywhere. So you might look off in the distance and say, well, it's windy, so they should be turning, but it may not be windy over where that is. So likely it's just that they're not spinning because of the wind. But when they turn themselves off, they turn their blades flat to the wind. And so if you're looking at me and I turn that blade flat like that, it doesn't see very much wind. There, it would see more wind. There, it sees none. And so if you see a wind turbine with its blades turned flat like that, it's likely turned itself off to wait for higher wind. When the wind is 15 miles an hour about is when they turn themselves on. And when the wind hits 55 miles an hour, they turn themselves off, because they also don't like those high winds because they can break. It can break the turbine. So they protect themselves, and so in between they run.
Okay, and our last question of this question time is, how big is the generator?
Yeah, the generator is about 2.5 feet by about 4 feet. So it's trying to think of a good example of what it might be. It's about it's about the size of the engine compartment of a car. It would be a good example. It's round and kind of cylindrical, and inside a generator is a bunch of coils of wire and magnets. And so the magnets spinning inside the coils of wire, so then we're turning that rotational energy into electromagnetic excitement, which is the electricity, by exciting the electrons in those coils of wire, and then that electricity flows down the wires, down through the tower, and out into the grid.
That's very interesting. Thank you for answering these questions.
Thank you, Victoria. All right, so now that we're done learning about solar panels and wind energy and wind turbines, we're going to have John show us a little demonstration that you guys can use in your classrooms to learn a little bit more about wind turbines.
Yeah, I'm going to let you roll it.
Yep.
I brought a few props here with me, and the props are the demonstrations I brought with me here are a kit that I've put together that classrooms can then take these and build their own turbines. And so you can see this little turbine, and this is just a mini version of a wind turbine. And so we can identify the parts that we learned about: the tower, the nacelle, the generator, the hub, and you can see that what it's missing is the blades. And so this is what the students get to do, is be engineers to engineer the blades for this particular wind turbine. And they build the blades, they take paper and they attach it to the dowels, and then they go on and make blades. Now, this is where the design it can be fun. How many blades should it have? It can have 1, 2, 3, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, whatever you want. And you can experiment with different types of blades, different sizes, skinny and long, thin and short and fat, whatever you want. You can also think about experimenting with the blade pitch. That's where this pitch protractor comes in, where you can help measure the blade pitch angle. Once you get that all hooked up, you actually then generate electricity with this turbine and figure out what it can generate. And what your goal is try to get 1 volt of electricity that can then light an LED light. And so that's kind of an exciting activity. And I have kits if people are interested in them. But you get to learn a little bit about engineering design, but also about how wind turbines work. Lastly, I'll say this wind turbine can not only be a horizontal axis turbine like we talked about, but a vertical axis turbine, and you could make different types of blades like those types of turbines you saw, and you could test the different types.
Awesome. I know that's something that I'd really like to do in class when I was that age. So now we are going to bring Deb onto camera with us with the Nebraska Extension. Hi, Deb. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself and your role with Nebraska Extension?
Sure. I'm Deb Weizenkamp, and I'm an extension educator with Nebraska Extension. I'm stationed in Nebraska City at the Kimmel Education and Research Center, which is a public-private partnership between Nebraska Extension and the beautiful Kimmel Orchard and Vineyard. So it's a beautiful spot. Come down and visit me sometime.
Of course, orchards are my favorite. So how can teachers across the state of Nebraska get in contact with their resources through Nebraska Extension?
Sure. Through Nebraska Extension, we have a presence in all 93 counties across the state. And so you can check out your local resources, check out your local extension office, and each of those extension offices will have someone that can help connect you with John, or to help you order one of those kits, or to even come out to your school and help you and your students go through the activities that John was talking about. I know I've done those wind turbines before in classrooms. We had a blast.
Perfect. And one last question. What's your educational background, and how did you become so interested in STEM, science, technology, engineering, and math?
Well, I have 3 degrees from UNL. My most recent degree is a PhD degree in education administration with a focus on distance learning and instructional technologies. And so that's why I was kind of excited about these virtual field trips. My interest in STEM, science, technology, engineering, and math, is a little bit older interest in that I have a personal mission to help kids live where they want to live and be who they want to be. So I really enjoy working with kids to help them leverage STEM resources so they can be who they want to be wherever they want to live. And so I've always been interested in STEM. But this particular virtual field trip, I got to tell you, there's some wind turbines in my area of Nebraska, and I've always just been dying to see what was inside. So that's how come we brought John on board to go inside one of those wind turbines.
Great, thank you, and thank you for being here today. So now I'm going to bring Victoria onto camera with me. We are both students in the Agricultural and Environmental Sciences Communication Program. I'll let her introduce herself a little bit.
Hi everyone again. I'm Victoria Talcott, and I grew up in Bennett, Nebraska on a farm with my parents and brother, and I'm currently an agricultural communications major here at UNL. And my favorite part about the program is being able to take classes about photography and video and use them on projects like this. How about you, Cassandra?
Yep, I'm also a senior in the Agricultural Environmental Sciences Communication Program. My favorite part, too, is really being able to be hands-on with everything that we do. We've both taken podcasting, video, and photo classes here at UNL with Dr. Lewitzo. And so when she brought up the idea of doing a virtual field trip, we jumped in, and we were really excited to help her out with it this semester. So that's all we have for this program. If you guys want to stick on and put in some more questions, we'll be happy to answer them for you. You want to grab some questions? Okay. We'll answer some more questions for you guys.
One of the questions is, why is STEM so important?
Well, I think that we have to think about our society and all that we do. And as our society grows and we get more people and we are starting to stress our environment, we need to solve problems. And this is what scientists do, is solve problems. They solve problems with pollution. They solve problems with energy. They solve problems with transportation, computers, all sorts of different things. And so it's really important to have good scientists to solve our world's problems as they come up. And also, we're going to have new problems in the future that we haven't even thought about. We're gonna face challenges in the future that are new to us, even that we've never even heard of, and we need scientists that can adapt and apply the science and technology that they've learned to solve those problems. So it's really critical.
And the next question is, can anyone climb up in the wind turbines?
Unfortunately, no. That actually it was a long process to talk with Lincoln Electric Systems and get all of the right permission to do it. They were very, very good to work with, and Lincoln Electric System, which is the local utility here in Lincoln, Nebraska, allowed me for educational purposes. I told them I want to show all of the students in Nebraska what it's like to climb a wind turbine, and they thought that was a pretty good idea, and so they made it work. And so I had to go through the safety training and get all the paperwork done, and then they let me climb up in the turbine so that I could show you what it was like.
Great. And another great question that has come in is, how long do solar panels and the wind turbines last?
Oh, that's an excellent question. And some of that is that with maintenance, some can last longer than others, right? So if we let them go without working on them, they wouldn't maybe last more than 10 or 15 years. But we can get wind turbines last 20 to 30 years before we need major overhauls. So you think about your car. Your car, if you drove it every day, eventually is going to need maintenance, need oil changes, but also may eventually need some more major things. Might need a new transmission after 400,000 miles, but it needed new tires every 50,000 miles. So the wind turbines are the same way. They can last 20 to 30 years before they need a major overhaul, at which time we might take the generator and the gearbox and all those things out, take the blades off, put new blades on. Things like the tower might last a little longer. Solar panels actually are a little different in the fact that because there's no moving parts, I really don't have maintenance to fix them. All I have is the fact that the sun and all those photons of light are beating down on that silicon crystal. That silicon crystal degrades over time. It gets it kind of breaks down. You can think about that car again. Think about it rusting. It's starting to rust, and eventually the rust gets so bad that I can't keep driving that vehicle. As soon as people have seen some old vehicles that finally rusted and we had to get rid of them. Well, that solar panel, although you can't see the rust, it degrades over time. And so after about 25 to 30 years, they've degraded to a point where maybe they need replaced. But I would say they last very well, 25 to maybe as many as 40 years before they're degraded to the point where they need replaced. And so hopefully they generate enough electricity to pay for themselves and then make money over that time. My personal ones that I had mine on my roof should pay back in about 8 years, and then I'm hoping that they'll run till they're 25 or 30 years old, and so they'll make some good money for me over that time.
Great. And another question is, can solar panels break if it hails or if there's lightning?
Solar panels are very tough. But yes, they can break. They are rated, they're made to withstand a golf ball size hailstone at 50 miles an hour. Now, you think but that doesn't happen all that often. But the other thing is at 50 miles an hour, that's also at a perpendicular or a 90-degree angle to the solar panel. So if that hailstone came in at an angle, it could handle a bigger hailstone. So the reality is they are about as tough as your roof. If your roof gets destroyed by hail, the solar panels do, but then you have your homeowner's insurance or your business insurance to pay for that. So yes, they are susceptible to hail, but they are pretty tough, and I've actually heard of some withstanding baseball size and even bigger size hail when it came in at an angle, and so they're tougher than people think they are.
Yeah, it sounds like it. And another question is, how long have wind turbines been invented?
Some of the earliest wind turbines were 1300 BC, created by the people in the Middle East, what we consider the Middle East, and they raised a lot of wheat in that part of the country, even as far back as 1300 BC, and they ground grain with these simple wind turbines that they created. They put basically a sail up in the wind, and then that sail would catch the wind and spin around, and they would have it hooked to a stone, and they would grind grain with it. Those were some of the early ones. Into the Middle Ages in Europe, they were again using wind power to grind grain or to pump water, and so those were some of the early ones. One of the first electrical generating wind turbines was actually in Pennsylvania, in the United States of America, and that was about in the 1880s. 1880s, 1890s was some of the first electrical generating wind turbines.
Okay, and now the students are wondering how long the solar panels have been around.
This is a good question. You guys might have caught me on that one. I'm less versed on the history of solar than I am on the history of wind. But some of the initial solar panels were developed, as the technology has been around for a long time, 50 to 100 years. But the actual solar panels and the ability to use that technology is somewhat more recent. But some of the early uses of solar panels were in the 1960s and 70s, and then we started having some on the commercial market for people to use in the 1980s. So the 1980s were when we really probably saw the first commercial solar panels get sold to the general public where we could buy them, but they were very, very, very expensive. And then as we moved forward, now before that, we've used the sun for heat and made a solar heat panel that had been used for a lot longer than that. But the solar to electric, the photovoltaic, are the ones from the 1980s forward.
Okay, and how long did it take you to climb up in the wind turbine?
It didn't take terribly long. It actually took about 12 minutes to get from the bottom all the way to the top. Now, in that 12 minutes, I would climb up about 100 steps, and then there was a platform, and then I would rest. And what they want you to do is rest and get your heart rate back to normal so that you're not tired when you climb the next section. And then I would climb the second section and get up, and then there was a second platform, and I waited, and then there's that last section, that little ladder into the top. And so that particular turbine only had the 2 big sections and 1 small section to get to the top. It took 12 minutes to get to the top.
That actually didn't take you that long to climb up all those stairs then, but can solar panels run out of energy?
Well, the sun doesn't necessarily run out of energy, so the solar panels themselves don't have any energy. They don't have any, all they have is the ability to convert the sunlight energy into electrical energy. So really, a solar panel is going to never run out until finally the components degrade to the point at which they can't convert the sunlight into electrical energy anymore, and that may be 40 to 50 years. So they actually don't have any energy to begin with. They're not like a battery. All they are is a conversion unit that converts sunlight into energy. And the sun, although we think the sun will never run out of energy, 2 to 4 billion years from now, it is predicted to run out. But 2 to 4 billion years, we don't have to worry about.
Yeah, and another question is, do you know how many solar panels and wind turbines are in the United States?
I don't know. I do know that the entire United States is about just under 1% solar, and so we don't have a huge amount of solar in the United States from our electrical grid basis. Wind turbines, it's actually getting much bigger. We're maybe 12 to 15% of our in total electric grid as wind turbines, and so there's 700 in Nebraska, but there is almost 2,000 wind turbines in Iowa. There's almost 10,000 wind turbines in Texas. There may be as many as 6,000 or 8,000 in California. So we're getting a lot of wind turbines across the United States.
Sounds like it. And another question is, did you hesitate to climb the wind turbine?
Well, no, I've been excited to do this for as long as I can have known about wind turbines. I've wanted to climb one, and so this was a great opportunity. But I can tell you the scariest part of that experience. You think that it might be scary to stand on top, and actually, I looked down at Victoria when I was up at the top. They didn't look up, so they didn't see me. But what was actually scary was when he turned on the brake when we were up there, and the blade was spinning very, very, very slowly. I mean, almost you couldn't see it spin. But when he stopped it, the whole turbine, the whole thing shook, the whole tower, like this, and we swayed at the top. And that swaying that I didn't know was coming was kind of scary. And so that was the scariest part.
Yeah, I bet. And the last question is, how do you know so much about energy?
Well, the thing that you need to do to get experience and know so much about these things is, number one, read a lot about it. And then number two, try to find ways to get hands-on experience. And so I knew a lot of things about wind by reading it, but when I started to help install small wind turbines, actually touch the wind turbines and get my hands on them and understand how they work, then I began to really feel like I understood what was going on. The other is that as you do more and more, you can start to do your own designs. And so for my solar, I know you asked about wind, but for my solar, I did all those calculations to figure out how many solar panels can go into my inverter, what kind of electrical circuitry do I have to have? Do I wire them in parallel? Do I wire them in series? And I actually pulled the electrical permit and did the electrical wiring myself. And so I had to learn a lot to get that hands-on, to be able to do that hands-on experience. But once you have done some of that design yourself, you really learn a lot. It's kind of like you as students, that you can read your book and learn a lot, but when you turn and try to tell your neighbor, your fellow students, what you learn and teach them about that, that really helps you remember it and helps you learn it really well. And so I've tried to learn things so that I remember them so well that I can teach you about them without looking at the book.
Great. We can tell that from the time we've spent with you today. And here's Cassandra then.
All right, guys, that's everything we have for this episode of the Streaming Science Electronic Field Trip Sun Rays and Windy Days. We'll catch you next time.